Hello everyone, and you should never take anything for granted. Pokémon is no exception, quite the opposite. Or tell that to all the Pokémon that thought they were kings until they were replaced. That's what we will talk about today. Pokémon that were replaced by others, be it for their competitive role, their function in the series, and countless other stories. But what better way to start than from the beginning? But not a story about us, it's about Wally. As a keen student and Pokémon fan with fragile health, he was often sheltered by his parents, who rejected the idea of him becoming a trainer if it would put him in danger. But he never gave up. Despite his family's refusal, he used his time to study and learn about Pokémon so that he would be prepared when the right time came. And so, one day, a new neighbor would arrive in Petalburg City. The new gym leader, who came from Johto, Norman, would convince his parents about how living with Pokémon can strengthen body and soul, and even be therapeutic, to which they would be a little more flexible with the idea of Wally having his first Pokémon, as long as it was under Norman's supervision. But it was there that fate would at last make him cross paths with Ralts, admitting that the game savagely portrays as faithful, as it's one of the rarest Pokémon in the game, only appearing around 4% of the time. Like Wally, Ralts is extremely frail and powerless at the beginning of their journey. But how right Norman was when he said that training Pokémon can transform someone for the better. That much is clear when we see the powerful Gardevoir it turns into, surrounded by Wally's powerful team, and in him there's no trace of the sickly and weak boy he was at the start. But in the remakes, we were all surprised to see Gardevoir being replaced by its counterpart, Gallade. Why would they replace such an iconic ace of the series? Wally's Ralts has always been male, so in terms of the Pokémon world, it always had the potential to evolve in both forms. One would think that with this brand new member they wanted to show its Mega Evolution in all its glory, but Gardevoir also has one. This was already Dianth's most powerful Pokémon, of course, so the marketing aspect, using the occasion to show off a new form, would have something to do with it. But actually, choosing this Pokémon reflects a bond that goes much deeper than that. Ralts is a weak Pokémon that yet hides an unmatched power, and when it flourishes, the Pokémon uses it to protect with its life the one who trusted in it in the beginning. So, many trainers underestimate Ralts and didn't even bother to catch it, but Wally, perhaps because he didn't rush into things without thinking and had been studying for so long, saw its potential from the very first moment. Kirlia evolves into Gardevoir just by trusting in it and training enough, but to transform into Gallade, it needs a Dawn Stone, or Awakening Stone in Japanese. This one didn't exist in the Hoenn of Ruby and Sapphire, so Wally never had access to it, but in the Hoenn of the remakes, he would get one on his journey and evolve Kirlia with it. This form perfectly symbolizes the awakening of this character, who like Ralts had that hidden potential that cannot be revealed until someone trusts him. Wally had all that talent, knowledge, and passion for Pokémon, but it wasn't until he had his adventure as a trainer that things clicked and became his true self. 5th generation, the end of an era. The franchise was experiencing such a moment of growth that led one to think that maybe it was time to try something different, just like the early stages of the game had foreshadowed with the Coronation Day. Because right off the bat, this Pokédex gave the impression of being a strange reflection of the 151 original Pokémon monsters. Just as its plot and characters came to question the very core of the series, many of its creatures took the original concept of Cantonian Pokémon and, once again, played with that expectation. But among them, deep in the forest, a deadly threat was waiting. Voltorb plays the role of mimics in the Pokémon series, typical role-playing game enemies that pretend to be a chest or object to aggressively attack the party. Designed to give an extra layer of depth to dungeons, they were usually in tough areas where the party was often injured and you had to choose whether whether to take a chance on a juicy bounty or a terrible monster to finish you off. In Pokémon, this is accomplished in a simple but genius way by Voltorb and Electrode. In this universe, items are in Pokeballs, and these traps are always in areas with a lot of interesting items but a lot of damage, where a false explosion can be fatal. On top of that, mimics traditionally don't let you run away from battle, which probably inspired an exploding ball to be so absurdly fast in the first place, as the success of the escape depends on speed. A basic idea, but very well executed. And in Unova it would be replaced by a very different being who could take the same concept to much deeper levels. Because to be honest, picking things up off the ground is not really something very well regarded, with a few exceptions, such as mushrooms. Besides being quite common to go foraging in the woods as a social activity, fungus and Among Us have an extra layer of logic to their concept, since precisely the greatest danger of engaging in this activity without care or preparation is that you might end up with a poisonous mushroom, as these Pokémon also are, giving a triple layer of meaning to their concept of an attractive but dangerous find that the mimic represents. But the icing on the cake would be its Western name. The names of Fungus and Among Us combined would create the phrase Fungus Among Us, which of course is said when you suspect that someone in a group is boycotting it from the inside. A perfect representation of this Pokémon. At first glance, a good find, like mushrooms in the real world or Pokeballs in this case, that end up hurting you like a poisonous mushroom or these two, that are altered states with feet. Well, in some people's dreams they do have feet. Voltorb and Electrode were already a good approach to the concept of mimics, but these two mushrooms take the role to the next level, being Pokémon that impress with the amount of ideas and references that are coherent with each other and perfectly linked. In Pokémon battles, stats are the backbone of everything, and if we were to look closely at Pokémon that in competitive have been replaced in later generations by others with similar roles but better stats, we might never stop. But one particularly tragic would be Deoxys Speed. That stat was the very core of its design, refined in detail to be as aerodynamic as possible, as the power of this mythical Pokémon is to modify its molecular structure to transform itself into the epitome of a particular battle style as the occasion demands. However, all its other stats would be conquered by Mega Evolutions and other specialized Pokémon. Speed was the only thing Deoxys was still the best at, and it seemed like it was going to stay that way forever, until the 8th generation, where we found out that the Titan creator Regigigas once made 2 more golems out of the 3 we knew about. One of them was created out of light. Regieleki destroys Deoxys Speed, obviously based on how nothing can exceed the speed of light, which makes you think that those 200 base points are going to set a limit that no Pokemon will be able to surpass. Although it may not seem like it from its relatively modest offensive stats, its ability Transistor boosts the power of its electric type attacks, which, together with its speed, makes it the very embodiment of destruction. It's a Achilles' heel, which kept it in check and gave Deoxys an advantage, was the removal of hidden power, which, together with its lack of non-electric type moves, caused ground types who are immune to stop its ambitions short. This was, of course, until the release of the 9th gen, when that seal would be released and Regieleki would get an infinitely more terrifying version of the hidden power it was denied. Terra Blast, with Ice type and twice the power to make those who could stop it in the past become its favorite prey. An impact that, needless to say, Deoxys could not even dream of, which means that the title of God of Speed changed hands in the cruelest way imaginable. Chances is one of the most curious stories in competitive play. At first glance, no one would think that a Pokemon with 5 points of physical defense that could be killed by a speck of dust would be one of the visible faces of the competitive battles from the very beginning thanks to its insane health points. But by the second games, the new and special Yodo overdid a new evolution, Blissey, and it's the curious relation and how balanced their forces have been throughout the generations that most catches my eye. At the beginning, Chansey was one of the pillars of the competitive scene thanks to the role that only it played and the fact that the special had not yet been split, which in addition to its role as a paralysis dealer also made it extremely good offensively. However, in the second gen it would be nerfed by the split, making its special attack very poor, but in exchange it would receive an evolution with slightly higher stats that would replace it. Of course, the gap wasn't really that big, and in the 5th gen, the Eviolite made Chansey endure attacks much better, even physical ones. Since then and over the years, they have been extremely evenly matched, with a general tendency to place Chansey with Eviolite slightly above, until these last 2 generations when it seems that the option of giving Blissey the new heavy-duty boots to go out and take hits without worrying about stealth rock has put it slightly ahead again. With the Eviolite, there are several pre-evolutions that have risen above its final form, but the constant back and forth between these 2 priestesses has been one of the most curious cases of a replaced Pokemon replacing its replacement, and so on and so forth in a seemingly never-ending cycle. While in the other examples of the video we see a rather bitter substitution of one Pokemon for another, in this case both pre-evolution and evolution seem to coexist in harmony, which is both reassuring and impressive. But now the night is descending, it's time for a different kind of story. This is the story of a young trainer who wished to be the strongest. Unfortunately, he wasn't very good at battles and had particular problems with effectiveness. He didn't understand the strengths and weaknesses at all, so he always lost to more skilled trainers that used super effective hits. Sick of not seeing the fruits of its labor, he went to an underground market with a reputation for selling powerful and secret magic tools. In response, the owner sold him a gem with the effect of bringing out the power of a small ghastly goblin with no weaknesses. It was perfect! Finally, he could start winning without worrying about the freaking effectiveness thing. He bought it with no hesitation, and after looking around for a long time, he managed to find the goblin he wanted, Sableye, a Pokemon with no special weaknesses whatsoever. But what a joke! Despite its perfect type, it was extremely weak, and the gem that was supposed to make it transform had no effect. Did it need to meet any extra requirements for it to work? Feeling frustrated, the young boy met a trainer in that same cave who introduced himself as a rock enthusiast. He looked tough, so our protagonist asked him out of desperation where could he find strong Pokemon with no weaknesses, so the trainer suggested trading the special gem he had bought for a stone that was said to be able to summon a Pokemon fitting that description. He gladly accepted the trade, and after much research he found Spiritomb, with the same type as Sableye but much stronger. How disappointed he was to discover that this Pokemon did in fact have a weakness, the newly discovered Fairy type, which as a novelty was all the rage and almost every trainer had it, causing the young trainer to lose even more battles than usual. Sick of scams and bitterly defeated, he stopped being obsessed with winning, and together with his little Dynamo, kept having battles. What a paradox it was to discover that his tiny electric Pokemon had all along possessed the ability to levitate, which made it immune to its only weakness, because trying to find magical solutions to deep issues doesn't lead to anything, and needless to say, Sableye was the first Pokemon without type weaknesses. Then in the 4th generation, the much stronger and more viable Spiritomb appeared and completely overshadowed it in that role. But in the end, both of them received what they deserved in the 6th gen with the newly introduced Fairy type and Electros, a Pokemon of a much more mundane type such as Electric, but thanks to its levitate ability, it was immune to its only threat, making it the only species officially without weaknesses. But who knows if even this last one will one day meet its fate, as Electric type Pokemon become vulnerable to a new one. A good trainer must be careful with their tactics and take very good care of their Pokemon. weather conditions, an element that could turn everything upside down in battle. They all boost the skills of certain Pokemon to the point that it's not unusual for a trainer to spend several turns constantly summoning it for their advantage. But in the first generations, there were abilities that went beyond that, and not only did they summon a weather by mere presence, the harsh sunlight, heavy rain, sandstorm or hail would not fade with the mere pass of turns, and so increase the power of certain Pokemon to a level where it was foolish not to take advantage of it. When it came to sun and rain, its influence was so huge that it was considered a forbidden power that only the legends, Groudon and Kyogre, could make use of. But with the introduction of hidden abilities in the 5th gen, everything changed, because two mortal beings, Politoed and Ninetales, were given that divine gift with the abilities Drought and Drizzle. This marked the start of the Weather Era, in which virtually every team was led by one of the two heralds, who tried to impose their weather to gain full advantage of the field in order to beat the enemy. But both Pokemon, aside from that magical gift, are far from being the strongest of their class. Aside from their ability, competitively they are both average Pokemon, way below the big leagues they dominated thanks to this anomaly. In the end, the change in how weather abilities worked, so that they were no longer eternal in the 6th generation, did hurt them. But the hardest blow came in the 7th and 8th gen, where two much more powerful Pokemon, especially in double battles, could be blessed with the same abilities. Pelipper, with stunning durability thanks to Roost and a good defense, Scald and Hurricane with stab in the rain and access to Tailwind, and then Torkoal with his devastating eruption in the sun. The absolute substitution that both of them underwent makes them both feel very nostalgic to me, as they were icons of a metagame that no longer exists, but the one where I got my first taste of competitive Pokemon 12 years ago, so I miss it like the mirage of a young summer.